On September 17th, our nation celebrates Constitution Day as the day the United States Constitution was adopted by the Constitutional Convention in 1787. This is a federal observation, and it is mandated that all publicly funded educational institutions and agencies provide educational programming about the Constitution on this day. On Constitution Day, typically volunteers seek out opportunities to educate our young people about the significance of the Constitution. This presentation is an effort to continue the tradition of attorneys and judges leading this initiative. This presentation is a collaborative effort of the Prince George's County Public School System, the National Bar Association, through its affiliates, including the local chapter J. Franklin Bourne Bar Association, and the Links Incorporated, including members from the Prince George's County and Mount Rose chapters. I am Judge Melanie Shaw Jeter, an Associate Judge of the Maryland Court of Special Appeals, and I'm joined today by Elizabeth Hewlett, Chair of the Prince George's County Planning Board of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. Together, we will endeavor to educate you to provide you a broader perspective of our United States Constitution, and hopefully at the end you will understand its significance and impact on our everyday lives. Our Constitution is probably the oldest working constitution in the world. It was created by a group of men during a hotly debated summer in Philadelphia under the auspices of really changing the Articles of Confederation. But it ultimately led to a new document, what we now know as our Constitution. It is the result of prominent leaders of that time, including George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and Alexander Hamilton, to name a few. These men felt that the government at that time was not meeting the needs of the people and sought to create a document that was reflective of the needs, the desires of our nation then and for our future. Research has indicated that immigrants coming to America seeking citizenship now know more about our Constitution than the average citizen. Those of us who are born here know very little. And while recent media events underscore the need for a deeper understanding of this document, research shows that we lack the knowledge or the desire to delve into the contents of our Constitution. All the more reason why September 17th should be celebrated and acknowledged as a day in which we learn more about our essential document. What is a constitution? Well, a constitution is a set of laws that basically establishes how a government is going to be organized and how it operates. And most often, it describes the rights of its citizens. It has limitations on how governments can use its power, and it provides for mechanisms of change. Our Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and it designs the American system of government, creates three branches of government, which we know as our executive branch, our judicial branch, and our legislative branch. And it gives each branch certain responsibilities, and it reserves power to the citizens, to the people of our nation. After the framers had written and agreed upon the contents of the United States Constitution, they realized that the document failed to address the rights, the individual rights of people. And so they then proceeded to develop and to agree upon the first 10 amendments, which are also known as the Bill of Rights. And the first 10 amendments address specifically rights reserved for the people of the United States. The first 10 amendments are known as the Bill of Rights, and they include rights that were provided for and that continue to provide for the citizens, individuals in our country. You know very easily the First Amendment, which is the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, religion, and assembly. This is most typically an amendment that most citizens embrace and has traditionally been used by citizens to express their rights to freedom of speech. The Second Amendment describes the right to bear arms. The Fourth Amendment is the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, and the Eighth Amendment relates to cruel and unusual punishment. There are various other rights described in the first 10 amendments, but these are typically those that are most commonly known by most of us. When the Constitution was written, really only white land-owning men could vote. And so in 1870, after the Civil War, the 15th Amendment was passed, and the 15th Amendment protected the right to vote for all men, regardless of race or color. Following that, in 1920, the 19th Amendment was passed, which protected the right of women to vote. And this year marks the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, whereby women were allowed the right to initially vote. And in 1964, the 24th Amendment was ratified, declaring that there shall be no poll tax for any persons in order for them to vote. And then finally, in 1971, the 26th Amendment was passed, protecting the right to vote for any citizen who was 18 years or older to vote. As you can see, these amendments made a significant impact on the voting population and really brought closer the framers' initial dream of having a democracy whereby all citizens could vote and could have their voices reflected. The voting rights are an important and integral part of our democracy, and the voting rights amendments reflect that our Constitution mandates participation by all citizens. Voting rights ensure that our democracy works, that our leaders are accountable to us, and solidifies that we make decisions in the best interests of our communities.
Thank you so much, Judge Jeter. Again, my name is Elizabeth Hewlett with the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, and I am about to tell you on what it means to vote. What does it mean? So voting is a formal expression of our opinion or our choice. And it's not just our constitutional right, but it's the exercise of our power. When you vote, you are ensuring that our democracy works and that our leaders are accountable to us as citizens. So what this means is that you count. Your voice matters. Do not squander it. As the late George Jean Nathan reminded us, bad officials are elected by good citizens who do not vote. So let's go back to the civil rights movement and all the causes that they championed, including getting us the right to vote. So the movement began in 1954 and ended in 1968, but in reality, it continues. So people began to march, protest, boycott, sit in, advocate, sue, litigate, and champion for the equal rights that were purportedly guaranteed to all citizens, but denied to certain groups of citizens in our community, particularly African Americans and minorities. Some could fight and die for our country, but could not eat in certain restaurants, could not eat at lunch counters, could not stay at hotels or motels along the way of long road trips, and often could not live in certain neighborhoods, could not get loans from banks to buy homes or shop in certain stores. Hence, we needed the civil rights movement to champion these causes, and brave people got out there and fought in the face of intimidation to secure these fundamental rights for us, including the right to vote. These rights also extended to voting. There were important acts that were enacted as a result of the civil rights movement and the sacrifices made by many. One such act was the Civil Rights Act of 1957, which allowed for federal prosecution against those who attempted to prohibit a person from voting, and there was a lot of that going on. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 made discrimination of any kind in public places illegal, prohibited racial discrimination in schools, and prohibited unfair applications of the voting registration requirements. And then there was the Voting Act of 1965, which prohibited racial discrimination in voting. Yet, it still continued. Imagine if you went to vote and those who wore glasses could not vote versus those who did not wear glasses. Boys could vote, but not girls. Brown hair could vote, but black hair could not vote. Imagine what you would feel like if you were the one who wasn't able to vote. So in the United States, the process of voting is the formal action of Americans choosing who will represent them and what matters to them. And voting is essential to our democratic government. However, there were many people who tried to prohibit and intimidate certain segments of people from voting, even after the federal laws changed prohibiting such actions. People were lynched, dogs and powerful water hoses were sicked on them, and so many other tactics. Houses were bombed, and so many other tactics were used to intimidate people from voting. For many years in the United States, certain groups of people were denied the right to vote. It was only after the amendments to the Constitution that the vote became a reality. Yet, as I said, people devised other tactics. The Constitution leaves the power to determine qualifications for voting to the states, and states have the power to determine who, when, and how people can vote for their government officials. So notwithstanding the constitutional amendments that were granted, many localities and groups tried other ways to stop people from voting. After the Civil War, in 1870, African American men were granted the right to vote by the 15th Amendment to the Constitution. However, soon afterwards, many states began passing laws which restricted their right to vote. And these laws only affected African Americans. Whites were usually exempt. One such restriction was the poll tax. So the poll tax is a fee. It is a tax that someone must pay in order to vote. Not everyone had to do that. So an example, Texas required eligible voters to pay between $1.50 and $1.75 in order to vote. Georgia required voters to pay more money every year starting from the time that they turned 21 years old in order to vote. The poll tax was not eliminated until 1964 with the 24th Amendment. So then there was the literacy test. In the state of Louisiana, for example, you had to demonstrate that you could read. You could see there was the literacy test imposed severe restrictions that were not imposed on everyone, so in order to grant them the right to vote. Another such example of a limitation was the restrictions on voting called the Grandfather Clause, which meant if your grandfather was able to vote, then you could vote. However, if your grandfather was not able to vote, then you were not able to vote. Well, of course, this affected many African Americans whose grandfathers were enslaved. So therefore, they could not vote. They did not have the right to vote, so therefore you didn't have the right to vote. And so those are examples that people used legally to stop people to vote. And of course, then again, there were the hoses, the dogs, and every other intimidation tactic. That is why most older people today actually vote. People of a certain age know and appreciate the struggle and the lives lost just to secure this right to vote. And so it's imperative that you never forget to vote. As the former First Lady, Michelle Obama, indicated, when you don't vote, what you're really doing is you're letting someone else take power over your own life. That is unacceptable. So, for example, should people wear masks? Let's think about that for a second. Some people will say yes. Perhaps most people will say yes. And some people will say no. But the point is, that's your opportunity to express your opinion. But what if you couldn't because you had red hair instead of brown hair? As part of the civil rights movement to secure these rights, there were many, many protests. One such protest involved many others, but especially the late Congressman John Lewis, who was an activist in the civil rights movement for over 60 years, beginning as a teenager, not much older than you are. He was on the front lines of the protests and he later served as a 17-year congressman. And he was beaten, and no matter what they threw at him, no matter what hoses they sicked on him, he championed our right to vote and championed civil rights until he died, right up until he died. So I know that you're a little young to be able to vote, but we want you to hold on to these thoughts for the moment you turn 18. We want you to vote in that very next election. But what you can do now is encourage your parents and everyone that you know who's 18 or over to vote. It matters. Your voice matters. And one of the things that you can do during this pandemic is mail-in voting. But in order to vote by mail, you have to request your mail-in ballot. So you can do that online, or you can go to your local board of elections and fill out the form and turn it in. But you have to do this. And we ask that you do this by mail or submit it via a drop box. So again, in conclusion, we just want you to know that voting is a right and a responsibility, but it is also a power. So I am so encouraged by the young people of today. I see you protesting. I see that you are woke. I see that you are paying attention and using your voice to be heard. I see you expressing it in terms of music and every other way that you can. You are not shy, not reticent, and that is such a beautiful thing. So use your vote when you turn 18. Speak up now. Understand that you matter. Your opinion matters. Give back to your community. And remember, John Lewis, get in good trouble as needed. And before I close out, Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution requires the United States to conduct a census every 10 years. The 2020 census is upon us right now. And what that means is the United States is trying to get an accurate count of every single person, every newborn baby, every older adult, every single person who resides in the United States. That doesn't mean they have to be a citizen. They just have to be a resident of the United States as of April 1st, 2020. Now, what does it mean to get an accurate count, and why is that important? Getting an accurate count of how many people live in your community means that the federal government can assess money to your community. It will allocate that money for school lunches, roads, other transportation, what kind of health care services are needed, hospitals, and so many other things. And it means money, federal funds for your community. So don't shortchange yourself and leave money on the table. Make sure that you are counted. It even helps determine how many vaccines might be needed in a particular community in the event of some sort of crisis. So it's very, very important that everyone you know complete the census. So if you haven't done it, you can do it online. It's 9 easy questions. It's very simple. It only takes 5 minutes. But the deadline is September 30th, and as of Constitution Day, September 17th, there will only be 13 days left. So we want to make sure you vote, make sure you stay woke, but make sure you are counted because you matter and your community matters as well. Thank you.